Oh, the old ones aren't enough for you? You don't want to hear about 096 for the umpteenth time? Well, fine, have it your way. I'll bring you the freshest of the fresh SCP monsters. The newest and rawest and possibly least long-lasting. Because today I'm hopping on the SCP-Wiki and picking out the literal newest monsters I can find. I went right to the new articles section and looked for anomalies that could be classified as monsters. Some I had to cut because they're a little weak and were getting downvoted, but these seem like they're well on their way to stardom, or at least on their way to a permanent spot in a Foundation holding cell. So sit back, relax, and let the newness wash over you. Someday you'll be able to say you knew these ones before they were cool, and really, what's better than that? Hello horror heads, and welcome back to the scariest channel on YouTube, Top 5 Scary Videos. I'm your horror host, Keegan Hughes, and today we're going to take a look at the top 5 newest SCP Monsters 2020. Keep in mind these are the newest as of the time of writing, so take that as you will. If SCPs make you want to sing, make sure you give our top 5 scary SCP playlist a try. It's over here. Wicked. Let's get going. Coming in at number 5, we've got SCP-5516. You like lobster? Well, if you're not allergic, you're not alone, but these lobsters are different. They're anomalous, and they seem to be able to replicate themselves almost instantly in order to keep their numbers stable. An experienced lobster researcher was brought into the Foundation to study these, but quickly learned too much. The Foundation couldn't abide by that and reassigned the doctor. Couldn't let them learn all that extra stuff, I suppose. See, it seems as though these special lobsters have some interesting properties. They cap their population at 101, and as soon as one dies, another one spontaneously takes its place. They all seem to share some sort of hive mind as well, acting simultaneously and perfectly dividing food between themselves. Distress rises in a lobster separated from its cohort, but they're particularly good at getting back to where they came from. Hell, they're even good at solving puzzles and making it through rudimentary blockades. They can unlock some doors even. All in all, instances of 5516 just seem to be particularly intelligent sea creatures. But if that were the case, why did the Foundation relocate the doctor? And why were they being so secretive? One might think that's just how the Foundation operates, but an addendum elucidates the situation a little more. It appears as though the Foundation was working on some new amnestics and testing them on lobsters to see if they could break from their group. No dice. But the doctor in charge seems to be adversely affected by it. So maybe the lobsters themselves aren't so bad, even if they are anomalous. Maybe the real monster is once again the Foundation. Coming in at number 4, we've got SCP-3195. How tall is a human usually? 5-6 feet? Well, this humanoid is 9 meters tall, and that's just the beginning of the oddities associated with 3195. It was originally discovered after landing in the Atlantic, seemingly originating from the rings of Saturn. After traveling through space for 9 years, it touched down and was picked up by the Foundation. At one point, 3195 might have been undamaged, but since entering Earth's atmosphere, it sustained all sorts of injuries. 60% of its body is covered in third-degree burns. All sorts of skin is missing. Some limbs are destroyed or simply aren't there. And instead of a heart, there's a big hole. Some days we all feel like that now, don't we? To make matters worse for this humanoid, all of the wounds are consistently bleeding and don't respond well to attempted first aid. All attempts to heal the injuries have failed, unfortunately, but it hasn't succumbed to them yet. After some interviews with the anomaly, it appears as though they won't be healing anytime soon either. There's a funny backstory to 3195, and it really isn't the monster. In fact, its mother is. I'm sure some folks can relate. The 9-meter lad had once been a star athlete, pressured to continue training by his mother, but all he wanted to do was create art in the stars. In fact, that's pretty much all he's been doing since landing on Earth. By waving his hands around towards the sky, all sorts of strictly visual nebula are formed. It really is quite dazzling. However, this is perceived as a waste of time by 3195's mother, who now knows he's injured and stuck on Earth. Now that he can't run, she's sort of given up on him, left him to die on our sweet blue planet. Tragic, right? But now you see why the anomaly isn't the monster, and instead it's the mother of the anomaly. Coming in at number 3, we've got SCP-5705. Keep an eye on your batteries, alright? Not just for leaks and charge levels, but just in case they're housing something other than battery acid. Take 5705 for example. On the outside it appears to be a 9-volt battery with a handwritten label that reads Mighty Batteries, powered by thorium. No radioactive activity usually associated with thorium decay though. Plus, it's nigh indestructible. From time to time, the battery will exhibit some odd behavior that folks at the Foundation refer to as a discharge event. This seems to show that there's an entity trapped within the battery who enters an agitated state from time to time. During these events, if the battery is hooked up to a device with a screen, all sorts of almost illegible text will appear on the display. After reading through some of these messages, I have come to the conclusion that there may or may not be a certain Norse god trapped inside, thanks to the hijinks of a certain trickster brother. That's just my interpretation though. There are some mentions of reduced reducing things to dust, lifting great serpents, and swinging hammers. You might not consider said deity a monster, but I don't want to know what kind of mayhem will ensue when he escapes the battery, and I'm not going to stick around to find out. In the meantime, keep your flashlights shining strong with thorium. Trademark. Coming in at number 2, we've got SCP-5147. Uh-oh, mannequins. If you want something to be at least 50% creepier, add some awful, faceless mannequin people. Or, add some faces to them, and just make sure that they're terrible faces. These ones are particularly interesting though, if you can stand to be near them for a little while. They're all part of what they call the Mannequin Troupe, a set of 41 mannequins, each with a unique skill set. They understand verbal requests and will do their best to fulfill what people ask of them. However, if the request is immoral or impossible, they'll just return to chilling as a mannequin. Not bad. Some of the different skills include cooking, identifying causes of death, building houses, performing vocal arias, putting out fires, and more. In fact, most of the skills they have are quite lovely. None can really be perceived as monstrous. The mannequins are immortal though, and any deadly damage inflicted to them will be healed up within 3 days, and then the mannequin returns to regular working order. So maybe they're not so bad after all. But the thing is, they're creepy mannequins that move on their own, and they have no face. Regardless of helpfulness and even documented gift giving, I just don't know if I can trust them. The uncanny valley rules my brain. Sorry, troop. And finally at number 1, we've got SCP-5494. The Great Lakes are known for a multitude of reasons, but not often referred to for their monster population. Well, that ends today. There are all sorts of chimera-type beasts living at the bottoms of Lake Huron, Ontario, Michigan, Erie, and Superior. And I bet you that makes you rethink your next vacation, huh? Get this. They're feline in shape, they have fish scales, horns like a bull, quills, feathers, and a copper serpent's tail. When I said chimera, I meant it. The exact number of 5494 instances in the lakes is impossible to ascertain, as they're excellent at camouflaging as well as disrupting any attempts to record them. And they eat the hell out of people too. When a Foundation research team tossed a deer into a lake to see if one would come up to eat, the research team was the thing that ended up being consumed. Mobile task forces have attempted to fight with these beasts as well, with similar results. The Foundation began consultation on native reservations in the area and found out all sorts of things about the anomalies. They appeared to be Manitou, or spirit, creatures known as the Mishipeshu. These creatures hold the copper deposits in the lakes sacred and are quite powerful. On assorted advice from different indigenous communities, the Foundation attempted to perform further research on 5494. All of these experiments resulted in the consumption of Foundation personnel. Following some internal reorganization and plenty of thought, it was decided that maybe it wasn't the Foundation's place to attempt to contain these creatures. In the end, it was left up to the indigenous communities who had known about and coexisted with the creatures for centuries to decide what to do. The creatures are still out there, trawling the bottom of the lakes, but the Foundation is leaving them well enough alone. Probably for the best. I wonder if any of these will last. That's the thing about the SCP-Wiki. If an entry isn't quite up to snuff, it may end up getting removed from the site. But if the writing is strong, edits can be made and monsters can stick around for quite a while. So, what'd you think? Are these all quality additions into the SCP universe? Will they make it to the halls of eternity? Or will they be replaced by something bigger and scarier? What's your favorite new SCP? Make sure you let me know down in the comments. Speaking of comments, let's take a look at some of your more persnickety ones from the top 5 shameless horror movie ripoffs. Jim Fleming says, Orca, terrible movie, great cast. Richard Harris, Charlotte Rampling, Bo Derek, Keenan Wynn, Robert Carradine, and Will Sampson. I mean, I never said it was terrible, did I? I just said it was a ripoff. But hey, all horror is good in my book. Fool says, now imagine a ripoff horror movie trying to build a cinematic universe. That honestly sounds like a blast. There could be all sorts of half-assed crossovers and lazy plot devices to bring stuff together. Hold on. Nick Lipscomb says, as a former Blockbuster employee, yes, every one of these were cringeworthy. A fine example, Transmorphers. I groaned audibly. Wouldn't it be great to be the producer who gets to greenlight stuff like that? Imagine the power. Tam Sin says, Orca is actually based on a book. Well, so is Jaws, which was published in 1974. And Orca? That was a 76 novel. My point still stands. And Jack the Ripper says, basically every horror movie is a reskin with the same elements, lol. They're all ripoffs. Yeah, there's nothing new under the sun. Every story has already been told. You just have to find an interesting way to tell it again. And that's all the time we have for today. Before I enter the New York sewers without the mandatory sacrificial pizza, make sure to give this video a big thumbs up and subscribe for more shrink-wrapped stories. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. One might think that's just how the Foundation operates, but an addendum elucidative. You might not consider said deity a monster, but I don't want an old male. You might not I'm gonna sneeze. Wow. If I had a soul, it would have left my body. We've been introduced to a whole lot of brand new things in 2020. Some good and some bad. Okay, well, mostly bad, but hey, that's life. Thankfully, we can all sit back, relax, and read a few SCP entries in our spare time. There are always new entries being floated on the wiki, and a fair deal of them are fascinating. Terrifying, eye-opening, and gut-wrenching, but fascinating. We've introduced a few brand new SCPs before, and we'll do it again. That's right, it's time for some more factory-sealed, fresh-out-the-oven SCPs. Hello, horror heads, and welcome back to the scariest channel on YouTube, Top 5 Scary Videos. I'm your horror host, Keegan Hughes, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Top 5 Newest SCP Monsters 2020, Part 2. If you have an unquenchable desire for more SCP content, I'd recommend heading over to our Top 5 SCP Monsters That Can Never Escape playlist, right over here. That's right, 21 episodes, no repeat SCPs. Have a blast. Alright, let's get started. Coming in at number 5, we've got SCP-5175. It's actually pretty impressive how close this SCP gets to being a joke, but never quite crosses the line. We've all known a Damien at some point during our life, and no matter how you felt about them, I'm sure you'd be happy if they got to live out their days with SCP-5175. Let me explain. This SCP is a knife, and you might be thinking, hey wait, a knife isn't a monster, it's a knife. Well, if you knew what this knife was capable of, you would think differently. Within the knife resides the spirit of Kuroi Tanken Hanzo, a 12th century samurai. He was trapped within the weapon by a witch centuries ago and needs to collect 1 million souls if he wants to be released. So he enlisted Damien to help him on this quest. Whenever person of interest 3445, or Damien Woodcock, uses the knife to cut anyone, Hanzo will materialize and take the person to the Shadow Realm. No, really, they disappear to an extra-dimensional space sometimes called the Realm of Unsaved Souls, or the Land of Forsaken Suffering, or Demon Realm for Bad Apples. It's a pretty wild and also super effective way of dealing with difficult adversaries quickly. So effective that the Foundation has enlisted Damien to lead a task force in clearing out an anomalous shopping mall full of otherwise invincible entities. Damien used to be a mall security guard obsessed with anime action movies and edged weapons. While walking by a cutlery collection at the mall, he felt a presence calling out to him. It was Hanzo, reaching out to him from inside the knife. Somehow he felt that Damien had the soul of a warrior, likely based on his constant thinking about shonen-style situations. After purchasing the knife, he learned of its anomalous properties and started training under the tutelage of the ancient samurai. These days, Damien and SCP-5175 can be found doing crazy flip-kick maneuvers and taking out dozens of strange creatures daily in the anomalous mall. Hell yeah, Damien. Glad you can live out your ninja fantasy. Coming in at number 4, we've got SCP-5987. At one point, it was assumed that the captain of the ship known as the Duc de Danzig had anomalous powers. The ship was a privateering vessel, well known for manipulating the paths of other ships, running them aground and smashing them into rocks. However, someone came across the ship one day and noticed something strange. It was drifting aimlessly, and upon further investigation, it was discovered that the entire crew had been killed in an extremely bloody manner. Assuming this was mutiny and that nobody else had the ability to steer other ships, folks were willing to put this one to bed. But a little later, a ghost ship started to appear. It would sail around for a while, exhibiting similar separate ship steering tendencies before disappearing without a trace. The Foundation then classified this phantom vessel as the real SCP-5987. Civilians had to be kept away from the manifestation area, and no Foundation ships could get close without being steered into disaster. To figure out exactly what was going on, a submarine was sent to investigate. The Duc de Danzig was discovered, full of skeletons and with a seemingly functional flagpole. Notably, the figurehead of the ship, a carved siren, had not taken any damage at all. It was at this point that folks figured out exactly what had been causing all the ruckus. The figurehead! It seems so simple now. The siren was indeed able to control any seafaring vessel within eyesight and was used to run rival ships aground. While vastly profitable for the captain and his crew, the siren herself resented the task. So one day, this carving decided to kill the crew. These days, the figure has been attached to a miniature sailing ship and is allowed to sail around a Foundation enclosure to its heart's content. We love a happy ending. It's just too bad so many ships had to go down though. Coming in at number 3, we've got SCP-5470. Back in the 90s, there was a fixation on being sucked into a digital world. Lots of TV shows, movies, and video games touched on this idea, fleshing it out in different ways. It was like escapism on steroids. What if we could live in these perfect places catered specifically to us? What if our imperfect human bodies could be left behind? What if all our problems could be forgotten? Well, that's what a group of extremely online teens decided to do when SCP-5470 was created. This SCP is literally an alternate dimension that one could access via a web address. This is all made possible by Juan, a figure in Maxwellist lore associated with the Church of the Broken God. Kimberly Van Veek, also known as Xenia, managed to build this place with the help of Juan. Unfortunately, she didn't take Y2K into account, and the Millennium Shift actually mattered in this dimension. This caused the structure of 5470 to start collapsing while folks were still inside of it. As one might expect, this alternate digital universe attracted all sorts of disenfranchised youth who made a life for themselves within the computerized realm. The world began to break down, creating a terrifying amalgamation of broken textures and old school 3D models. Things were corrupted and the people inside needed to be extracted before they ceased to be. This entry is definitely worth a read, as it's sort of difficult to get the whole vibe of the story across in a single list entry, so go check it out. Coming in at number 2, we've got SCP-5391. I'll kick off this entry by reading the last piece of correspondence between two Foundation researchers. What do people usually do when confronted by giant monsters? They build mechs. That's right, we're looking at an SCP Kaiju situation here. SCP-5391 is part of the Broken Masquerade timeline where anomalies and the Foundation have been revealed to the world at large. Here, all sorts of gigafauna have been showing up around the world and causing problems for everyone. They are gigantic versions of already existing organisms rising from the sea, and they all vary in size. However, they're also all highly radioactive and very dangerous. Upon reaching a dense population center, these beasts usually go about being destructive. Tsunamis, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and of course giant monster rampages are all associated with the arrival of these beings. There have been crocodilian cephalopods and enormous wolf eels. Some appear as massive leafless trees and others as enormous Goliath beetles. Many different approaches have been tested to deal with the creatures, none of which were very successful. Some people even suggested that the Foundation raise a kaiju from infancy and use it to fight against the aggressors. In the end, there really is only one thing to do though. Follow in the footsteps of the Jaeger program, or maybe come up with a way to make EVAs. You can't take down giant monsters with regular military equipment. You need a mech. You need a bunch of mechs. And SCP-5391 is a living document concerning the development of anti-kaiju measures. And finally at number 1, we've got SCP-5520. This anomaly used to be the SCP Foundation senior researcher and provisional site co-director Dr. Wynne Riderick. After being exposed to esoteric materials for most of his career, he gained some reality-bending abilities. Along with these abilities came cognitive impairment, dissociation, depersonalization, derealization, and amnesia. He's been toiling away in a vast series of caverns below Site-43, researching things that don't quite make sense to the average layperson, or anyone for that matter. He can't explain why, and it doesn't seem as though he's keen to stop anytime soon. The structures below Site-43 aren't anomalous themselves, but they're so large and improbable that their existence is anomalous. The good doctor dreamed up 43 staff to work under him and continued to work in line with the Foundation's objectives. As he continues his work and alters reality down there, his mental state deteriorates further. Folks above ground have attempted to communicate with him to varying degrees of success. Most of what he sends up is nonsense about principles that don't really apply to the real world, if there is such a thing, and anyone who goes down to visit inevitably disappears. Thanks to a letter left behind by the old Wynne, it seems as though he knew that he'd eventually mentally decline to the point that he wasn't even a sliver of himself anymore. The Foundation doesn't seem to mind this too much. Lots of fresh SCP content for you there. It seems like just yesterday the SCP-5000 contest winner was announced. Now we've got a whole truckload of entries in the 5000s. What a world, right? So, what'd you think of the list? Do these new entries scratch that very same itch? They're less explicitly scary than a lot of the classic SCPs, eh? Do you prefer new school or old school anomalies? Make sure you let me know down in the comments. Speaking of comments, let's take a look at some of your more pearlescent ones from the top 5 horror plots that made us question everything. Helix Jovian says, I feel like Keegan is low-key Satan, but on the nicer side. What? Low-key? I need to work harder at this. Brian Baker says, House is the trippiest trip since Trips came to Triptown. Where have you been? Triptown got incorporated, now it's Trip City. Big things on the horizon for the Trippites. 360 Entertainment says, I'd recommend any of these movies to anyone. Joe Bob Briggs recently showed One Cut of the Dead on the last drive-in. I highly recommend watching it on the last drive-in if possible. Absolutely. Always a good way to watch a flick. Joe Bob and Darcy bring a whole lot to the table while discussing horror. Blue Dog 79 says, how did you manage to make a list of my favorite horror movies almost perfectly? Is this real? Is any of this real? Who am I? This is exactly the kind of reaction we're going for when we say stuff is gonna make you question everything. And Rookie Agent 47 says, "I sad to say I haven't seen any of these." Well, that's really not a problem, is it? Now you got 5 new movies to check out. And that's all the time we have for today. Before I consume all of my household cleaning products in one sitting, make sure to give this video a big thumbs up and subscribe for more dances with anomalies. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. That's right, it's time for some even whoop. At one point, it was assumed that the captain of the ship known as the Duc du Dancing was whoosh 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 whoosh. Let's try that again. The ship was a privateering vessel, well known for manipulating. Wow. It would set sail for a ride. The Duc du Dancing was fiddler. I can't say that and then continue saying a sentence, and I don't know why. These days, the fixture has been attached to a miniature sailing ship. You can't take down giant monsters with regular military equipment. He's been toiling away in a vast series of caverns. Oof. Thank you. Well, this is awkward. I thought for sure that 2 episodes of brand new SCP Monsters would be good enough to hold you folks in check. But hey, I'm not complaining. I'll gladly introduce you to a whole bunch of new monsters, especially if it keeps you guys from complaining about hearing about the same ones. As we continue down the totally new route though, we're gonna get some stranger and stranger entities. I can't even call all them creatures at this point, but still, there are some fascinating and freaky things to explore in that top rated new pages tab. Maybe some days these will all be as iconic as Series 1 monsters, although that would require a lot of PR to be done for these newbies. I suppose only time will tell. Or maybe, just maybe, somebody will make another version of Containment Breach populated by strictly 2020 SCPs. Hello horror heads, and welcome back to the Scariest channel on YouTube, Top 5 Scary Videos. I'm your horror host Keegan Hughes, and today we're going to talk about the top 5 newest SCP Monsters 2020, Part 3. If new SCPs make you feel young again, make sure to check out our SCP playlist right over here. Coming in at number 5, we've got SCP-5842. You are never gonna guess what this SCP is. Seriously, if you think you can figure it out without going to read it, you are going to have to stop. Get it? Well, I guess not yet, right? I haven't said it. Okay, I'll let you in on this one. SCP-5842 is an anomalous stop sign. You know, the big red octagons with white lettering that inform vehicle-borne folk that it's time to slow down and make sure it's safe to proceed. Classic. Well, this stop sign makes sure that people are stopping for more than just traffic. It seems to like to teleport to inconvenient locations and make people reconsider their choices. At first, folks thought it was totally random, but a bit of investigation reveals that there is indeed a pattern. This stop sign appears to folks in the Greg's family quite a bit, as well as in the home and workplace of a judge and at the local funeral home. It doesn't just appear in these locations and act like a stop sign though, it seems to have the power to make people not want to do things, or at least believe they are being compelled to stop. The stop sign only started appearing following the death of Thomas Greggs, a crossing guard with a wife and kid. The sign would show up to prevent Wilma Greggs from getting into her car and would often appear before young William Greggs. These might be protective acts meant to keep Thomas's family safe after his death, but the sign has also caused deadly traffic accidents. Although, the victim of one accident was somehow involved in Thomas's death, so maybe it was an act of revenge. Either way, a magical teleporting stop sign that compels people to act out of character is hard to deal with. Coming in at number 4, we've got SCP-5106. What do you know about geese? Not enough, probably, but I'm about to change that. SCP-5106 is a very special case. Very special indeed. Often going by the name Dawn, it is a hyper-intelligent, language-speaking, petty crimes-committing goose. Usually opting to hang out in parks and other public places geese are often found, 5106 has the ability to command non-anomalous creatures. Nobody's sure if this is part of its anomalous qualities or if the animals are just willing to take orders from an exceptional bird. Both options are great. So this goose, Dawn if you will, goes around stealing things like lots of theft, phones, vehicles, surveillance equipment, money, etc. And then it sells these things back to humans using the barter system. A goose has little use for a smartphone, right? So you could potentially get a new phone for the low price of 5 slices of bread. Not bad. Be careful though, if you make Dawn mad or try to screw him over, he'll come back with a vengeance. Geese are scary enough on their own. Add in intelligence and the ability to enact revenge and you are in big trouble. At one point, the Foundation sent some folks to scope out the area and try to hit Dawn with a tranq dart. Little did Agents Finch and Crane know, the goose was prepared. He sent a decoy out, lured them into firing, and managed to loot their van while the 2 agents were distracted. What a world we live in that you get robbed by a goose. After this altercation, Don was gone like the wind. The Foundation is trying to model his migration patterns to find him once again, but it doesn't seem like Don is willing to be caught. People who have seen the goose tend to be amnesticized, and that's about it. To be honest, I think the world is a better place with a criminal goose on the loose. Coming in at number 3, we've got SCP-5241. Officially, SCP-5241 is a funky cube. Yeah. Oh, right. It was designed to contain SCP-5241-A, which is a crazy advanced AI with the ability to communicate telepathically, which now that I think about it might be the more interesting part of this entry. Sorry about that. At some point during transportation, SCP-5421-A managed to send the driver off the road and then fuse the driver's spine to the truck's electronic system, which created one called 5421-1. So some piece of the AI made it into this melty human vehicle abomination and was then able to communicate with the Foundation. They kept Dash-1 in containment for a while, interviewing it and attempting to figure out what the cube and AI were up to. At first, no new information was discovered. However, soon after, the cube itself started vibrating at high frequencies. This was followed by members of the Church of Maxwellism breaking into the containment site, disabling and sometimes killing Foundation personnel who attempted to stand in their way. Oh boy. The invaders were somehow staved off, and SCP-5421 and 5421-A are still in containment. These days, the Foundation has done their best to program something near the level of this AI. It hasn't exactly been successful, but they've managed to create a prototype known as Project Ruby to analyze the thing, so we'll see where that takes us. Coming in at number 2, we've got SCP-5952. A lot of SCPs end up going largely by their numerical label, but not this one. This one's called the Warbalang. The folks over at Whitewater's Second Chance School for Troubled Teens think it's a demon, and members of Theta 6 Witch Hunters might concur. The Warbalang is a 2.5-meter humanoid creature with misshapen features. It has uneven legs and its feet end in club-like bone protrusions. Its face is really messed up, 2 eyes and a slanted toothless mouth. Best of all, it's got a hunchback. Despite all these less than fantastic features, it is just as strong and fast as any human would be standing that tall. For years, people have reported seeing this creature skulking about the halls of the school, and many claim that it's been kidnapping students, but as of right now, no supposed victims have been recovered, dead or alive. Although there might be some interesting information in the logs that contradicts said report. Demons don't come from nowhere, the school is definitely not as innocent as it seems. Strange things happen when nobody's watching, and sometimes folks who do watch end up in pretty rough situations. Hidden rooms, twisted religions, and some general witchy business underscore the events that take place at Whitewater. Of course, the students bear the brunt of this, but the faculty seems to think it's less serious than it really is. Just watch out for the Warbalang and try not to answer too many questions. You never know what folks might do with that information. And finally, at number 1, we've got SCP-5841. Office buildings are creepy enough without anomalies inhabiting their 5th floors, but here we are anyway. Somehow, this thing has managed to reroute all the power in the building to the 5th floor. Anyone who enters is invariably turned into what is known as an instance of SCP-5841-1. These are dead human bodies with electrical cables inserted at the base of their spine. The anomaly can then control these dead, electrified humans and uses them to attack any intruders. And really, these dead humans without any will of their own aren't that different than your average cubicle worker. As of right now, only Project Ruby-based AI has directly interacted with this anomaly, but it seems as though it will be able to be contained. Apparently it's scared of something and folks don't quite understand what yet. But it might be connected to 5241, you know, the cube and AI combo from earlier in the video. This whole artificial intelligence applications division arc is quite interesting, and I'm excited to see how it turns out. I'd actually recommend looking at Project Ruby and seeing what connections you can make between these entries. Or just enjoy the story of an office building full of blood and broken computers. It's pretty wicked too. So many possibilities, so little time. We're in what appears to be the fastest growing era of SCP content yet, with plenty of new entries hitting the wiki all the time. Plenty of meticulously planned out crossovers and collaborations too. So what'd you think of the list? Are you totally up to date with Series 6? What is your favorite SCP from 2020 so far? Do you think any have the potential to become iconic? Make sure you let me know down in the comments. Speaking of comments, let's take a look at some of your more icy ones from the top 5 SCP monsters most likely to escape, part 2. Flame Belladonna says, spending most days lazing about and eating on someone else's dime. Me too, 2662, me too. That's the life, right? I'll figure out how to make it work someday, just you wait and see. Michael Whitehead said, where there's a will, there's a way. Every sentient SCP has the potential to escape. 2 factors are at play here. First, a lot choose not to. Second, opportunity. Those that want to are playing with SCP personnel, looking for that instance they can exploit to do so. It's just like a prison break, but on like anomalous steroids. Tyrus Crane says, that's another for Apocalypse Bingo. Oh, we're getting close, aren't we? I've got 4 across, I just need 1 more. Permeus says, we have a set rule in my home, implemented by me. No Christmas until All Hallows Eve has finished. Also, Halloween starts October 1st. I love Christmas, but Halloween needs its space. That is a quality rule. Christmas can be hard to avoid though. I saw eggnog at the grocery store the other day. Shauna Brown says the funniest SCP is the man that no one pays attention to. He talks and people just ignore what he's saying. I wish I could remember his number. He said his number, but I didn't hear it. Joe Schmo, legendary SCP. He could escape no problem too. I think he's SCP-1504. And that's all the time we have for today. Before I try to play with molten glass like Silly Putty, make sure to give this video a big thumbs up and subscribe for more brand new nonsense. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. 2020 is coming to a close faster than you would expect. What a year, am I right? It's tough to look back upon all that happened and come away with a positive outlook, but hey, at least some quality scary stuff got breathed into existence. From quarantine-made movies to some genuinely spooky music, all the way to wicked writing, 2020 made people approach their media differently. And of course, plenty of new SCPs were dreamed up. We've taken a look at 15 brand new SCPs so far, and here comes 5 more. Some may not manage to find a permanent place on the wiki, and others might become legendary in their own right. But there's only one way to find out which is worth a read and which are a little less than lustrous, right? Hello, horror heads, and welcome back to the scariest channel on YouTube, Top 5 Scary Videos. I'm your horror host, Keegan Hughes, and today we're going to be taking a look at the top 5 newest SCP Monsters 2020 Part 4. Want more SCP? Check out our top 5 SCP Foundations videos playlist right over here. Excellent. Let's get to it. Coming in at number 5, we've got SCP-5070. Inanimate objects should remain that way. You know, inanimate. If they start acting like they're sentient, I get a little worried. Toy Story is a lovely story and all, but if I ever saw an action figure act like that in real life, I would be convinced it was demonic possession or something. I would burn it or drop kick it out the window. But what do you do when something that doesn't have a human or animal shape starts acting funny? Take SCP-5070 for example. It is a stapler. Little underwhelming, eh? Well, at least until you observe it for a little while. This black paper fastener is indeed sentient and acts like a woodpecker. Manages to hop and fly around using 2 triangular pieces of paper taped to its handle. The paper is heavier than normal paper, but other than that, everything about this stapler lines up with any other stapler on Earth. If you ignore the sentience and the flying, I mean. But get this, it's a very dangerous stapler. The inscription on the bottom should tip you off as to why. It says, vamp. Yep. This stapler has a thirst for blood. Every once in a while it will enter a hunting phase, and when this happens it'll seek out the closest living animal and effectively staple it to death. Once the prey is dead, the stapler will then absorb the blood through little staple teeth. Nobody knows where this blood goes after a hunt, seeing as the stapler appears to be just a regular stapler with all regular stapler parts, no blood container. It will also drain the color red from objects in place of blood if no live prey is available, like Marceline from Adventure Time. That's actually how the Foundation found the little bugger. Increased reports of once red objects turning gray showed up, and they eventually came across an uninhabited home with an aviary in the main bedroom. Apparently the stapler was created by an anomalous product maker, but I won't get into too much detail here. All you need to know is that there is a flying stapler out there that will drain you dry. Be careful. Coming in at number 4, we've got SCP-5194. Oh no. That just about sums up how one might feel after reading this entry through. The SCP itself has 2 parts. SCP-5194-A, an anomalous submersible that was meant to collect data, and SCP-5194-B, an anomalous memortic sink meant to turn memories into binary code. For a while these 2 objects were being experimented on as possible next level amnestics. They can be used to remove hard to remove memories, usually ones imparted by anomalous means, and store them somewhere secure. But things got a little out of hand. It became apparent that 5194-B wouldn't just remove memories. No, it went much further, annihilating some people, leaving them as lifeless husks. Sure, they were technically alive and they could move around, but they really didn't exist anymore at that point. So the team scrapped it. They shut down the anomalous memortic sink and decommissioned the submersible at the bottom of the ocean. They thought that was that. Game over for 5194. However, it somehow brought itself back to life. It was discovered by the Foundation later on, which surprised folks who expected it to stay at the bottom of the ocean, where they left it. Worse yet, it was full of brand new data. The memortic sink would take people's memories and convert them into binary code, right? Then they'd put it somewhere where it couldn't be accessed. Well, that code did have to be stored somewhere. And when the Foundation rediscovered the submersible, they also found that there was plenty of code they didn't know about stored in there. Data that nobody knew the origins of. stolen memories from all sorts of people that may never be found and may very well be lifeless husks, either wandering the earth or also lying at the bottom of the ocean. Coming in at number 3, we've got SCP-5481. A classic horror trope is having characters misinterpret trees as something more sinister. Sometimes a branch scraping a window can feel like a monster trying to break in. Other times, a swaying tree in the woods can appear to be a person from the right angle. Well, SCP-5481 brings those ideas to life, like literal life. These trees have arms and they follow people for ages. 5481 instances usually look like Douglas firs, but they have been known to take on the appearance of other common trees. If a humanoid entry comes in contact with one, the tree will seem to grow a pair of arms and then hug whatever's there. It's a gentle hug, nothing too sinister there, which I mean, to some people might seem pretty appealing, eh? Just walking up to a tree getting a little TLC. But when the subject ceases to touch the tree, the arms disappear. The Foundation has found that these arms are biologically human, with complex muscular systems and all. They seem to appear spontaneously, which is fun. As of right now, these trees seem to only have one objective though, which is follow Jade Johnson. The Foundation discovered a vast grove of these trees in an Oregon forest. They seem to group up around a cabin, and in said cabin, a journal was discovered. The journal contained the writings of Jane Johnson, who wrote about running away from her home and encountering these trees quite often. Somehow, her mother managed to break up her family and created these anomalous trees, which then pursued Jade wherever she went. Eventually, Jade disappeared. And with her, so did new instances of the trees. Curious. Coming in at number 2, we've got SCP-5877. This one's a good jumping off point for the Man in the White Suit hub, which is an expansive tale of nobodies and name machines. Have fun with that. But to focus on 5877, we'll discuss what exactly they are. This SCP refers to a collection of human-like entities. They're identical to regular people but have no origin. No identities, no records of prior existence, and most recovered instances have been deceased, and they'll show up in places where they really shouldn't be. At one point, dozens were found in the remains of a house fire, even though only 2 people were unaccounted for following the evacuation effort. Another strange event was when a plane crashed and 30 additional victims were discovered, none of whom could be identified. It's just freaky, don't you think? That beings would just appear like that, totally without any roots? Of course, there's plenty additional information to be gleaned from the logs, but that's all part of the bigger picture. Take a look and see if the story draws you in. Let me know if you figure out where exactly all these nameless, identityless people come from. And finally, at number 1, we've got SCP-5353. And speaking of the Man in the White Suit, here is a possible titular character. He and nobody are waging a private war of sorts, causing problems and solving them at the same time. I'm not so sure that we can call SCP-5353 a monster, as they've done both benevolent and beastly things over the years. He's interesting, but also a little scary. Keep an eye out for these mysterious figures. They seem to be able to make strange things happen wherever they roam. 5353 has been sighted putting up leaflets that are full of unreadable anomalous text. He's also been spotted chilling in the woods, smoking a cigarette, supposedly waiting for a sign. Days later, a wildfire suddenly started in that very same forest. He's brought down bribery and corruption in Wisconsin, but he's also been seen murdering renowned fortune tellers. It's hard to tell whether anyone would ever be able to trust the Man in the White Suit, which is probably what makes him so interesting. Again, check out the story hub for this one, especially the guy named Nobody. Very interesting indeed. Well, well, well. Did I open your mind to some new anomalous possibilities? I sure hope so, because without new SCPs, what are folks gonna do? Reinterpret the old ones until eternity comes for us all? Well, I'm sure that'd happen either way. So what'd you think of the list? Have you read any of these? Have you been keeping up with some of the new story hubs? And which is your favorite? What new SCP really floats your boat? Make sure you let me know down in the comments. Speaking of comments, let's take a look at some of your more even-keeled ones from the top 5 horror movies you shouldn't watch with your parents. Sinister Sadie says, "You had me at Penis Slugs the movie. We're best friends now." Oh, perfect. I was looking for somebody to bring snacks to movie night anyway. Want to follow up Shivers with Scanners? Or Videodrome? Your pick. AA Street says, "I'm totally gonna watch all these with my dad and his husband. The Peanut Gallery will be hilarious." The Peanut Gallery better not be innuendo for anything. You know, after all the inappropriate things I mentioned in the last video. Random Street Theater says, "When I was 11, my old man got a copy of Rocky Horror Picture Show on VHS and we all sat down and watched it. He would have been happy to watch any of these films with me." Rocky Horror is a blast and a half to watch with your family as long as everyone's okay with the musical. I know not everyone can handle sing-alongs. Matthew Miller says, "I almost watched Enter the Void with my dad and his wife, but I had just downloaded it and my gut told me to watch it before that. I am glad I went that route. It saved a lot of awkwardness, what with the graphic, sex, and subject matter. Plus, there would have been a lot of explaining to do as the movie is very unorthodox and refuses to give any answers. Good call. I'd say always exercise caution while screening a Gaspard Noé flick. Although, who knows? Maybe you'll convert your dad and his wife into hardcore art house fans. And Golden Sirius says, notice how he places his hands. The upside down triangle. That's to encourage you to trust him. Previous hosts did the same, so it's clearly a channel policy. Kind of ridiculous. Damn it, you got us. Illuminati confirmed. We're trying to brainwash you all into liking us. It's definitely not because nobody ever knows what to do with their hands on camera. Before I broadcast a vehicular chainsaw murder on a minor rock radio station, make sure to give this video a big thumbs up and subscribe for more killer creatures. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Go. That's the console of the future, you know? When Microsoft and Sony implode, Sega will rise from the ashes. Alright. The Memortic Sync would take people's memories and cabin was a journal, and with her, so did new interest, and with her, no identities, no regular, no identities, no, he's, how am I supposed to say that? Again, check out the Story Hub for this one. It is absolutely fascinating to see how quickly the Series 6 slots are filling up the SCP-Wiki. Folks just can't stop coming up with new ideas. Hey, I'm not complaining. It seems as though lots of bigger, more expansive ideas are being put into action as well. Plenty of new hubs and overarching stories to tie bits together. Jaegers vs. Kaiju, artificial intelligence monsters, and tales of people who might not actually be people. There's a wild variety of new content hitting our screens every day, and I'm just doing my best to keep up. Only so many hours, right? So here we are once again, counting down a list of fresh friends. Let's see how it goes this time. Hello horror heads, and welcome back to the scariest channel on YouTube, Top 5 Scary Videos. I'm your horror host, Keegan Hughes, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Top 5 SCP Monsters 2020 Part 5. If you want more anomalies, make sure you check out our Top 5 SCP Foundation videos playlist right over here. Excellent, let's get going. Coming in at number 5, we've got SCP-3352. Okay, I'm going to come out and say it. This one is hard to spin as a monster. I suppose the real monster here is unchecked resource development and the use of dangerous chemicals and products. Or maybe the monster's strength that prevented disaster. Still, this is a fascinating read and highly recommended. Also, it might not seem like it's a new SCP because it's in the 3000 range, but it was uploaded in October 2020. Go figure. Alright, so let's actually talk about this SCP. Back in 1992, there was a petroleum refinery in Hardwick, Pennsylvania. The fact that it was so close to the residents of the city was kind of sketchy because if anything went wrong, it could have major detrimental effects on all the residents. One seemingly average day, a horrible mess of failures occurred. An elbow flange started spouting fire and couldn't be put out. Soon after, it exploded, causing a major chain reaction. Folks attempted to use the refinery's internal fire water system to fight the blaze, but as it turns out, there was something wrong with that too. The system had been compromised a week earlier and now contained high-pressure liquid propane. Hydrofluoric acid was being used on-site to assist in alkylation, and this stuff is raunchy. It burns through anything and has a low boiling point. The nearby city could have been consumed by a cloud of hydrofluoric acid if nothing was done. The fire spread, assisted by the propane, and more failures happened. Concrete started boiling, and it was an absolute disaster, just waiting to happen. By the time workers made it down to the spot where they could potentially evacuate the boiling acid, it seemed like it was too late to do anything. The beams were gonna give, and the place was gonna go up in flames. But one beam didn't. It had experienced several minutes of fire in excess of 2,000 degrees Celsius and sustained no structural damage. No beam should have been able to do that, but SCP-3352 did. Coming in at number 4, we've got SCP-2693. You're probably gonna be mad, but it's hard to classify this one as a monster as well, I know. It just seems like if we're gonna keep up with the newest of the new, we're gonna have to take what we can get. But this one is also interesting. Take this in. It's a cat-well relationship that causes the cat to teleport all over town. Yeah, so we've got 2693-1 and 2693-2, a well and a calico cat, respectively. Neither appear to be anomalous in any way of their own accord, but if you put the two near each other, then weird stuff starts happening. Whenever the cat is near the well, it will immediately attempt to jump in. You could stop it, but it'll just get back there eventually. If it falls into the well unimpeded, shortly before it hits the bottom, it will be teleported to a random location within a 50-mile radius. And every time this happens, the cat's tail is shortened by 1 inch. The reasons for this tail shortening are unknown. But you know the old saying about cats, right? How they've got 9 lives? Well, that appears that this is the case for this poor calico cat. After 8 attempts of hopping down the well, the cat had no tail left, not even a stump, just nothing. And of course, it found its way back to the well and hopped in as per usual. Bad call this time. On the 9th attempt, it actually hit ground, and well, even though it landed on its feet, it didn't manage to make it out. Sheesh. Let's call the well a monster for having such magnetic pull over a cute little cat. Coming in at number 3, we've got SCP-5606. Here's some good Canadian content for you. SCP-5606 is a zone in northern Saskatchewan that pops up from time to time. It's been observed growing as wide as 200 square kilometers before contracting and disappearing. Usually you can tell that it's there by the sudden appearance of fog and snow regardless of prevailing weather conditions. The conditions within this zone are similar to ones in our reality, but it appears as though it's from a timeline where humanity no longer exists. But you know what does exist in this space? Extra large polar bears. The only living occupant encountered within SCP-5606 is an extinct subspecies of polar bear known as the Ursus maritimus tyrannus. These bears were often 140% bigger than the polar bears we're used to. And in this zone, they will follow you forever. In video footage shot by 2 agents who found themselves lost in the cold expanse of 5606, you can hear them talking about how the bear wouldn't leave them alone. If they didn't keep constantly moving, it would catch up to them, and nobody wants to be caught by an enormous polar bear. That is a bad time for sure. In addition to the strange weather conditions, polar bear, and possible inter-reality qualities, 5606 also seems to throw guilt in people's faces. One of the agents already mentioned also saw his deceased wife trapped under the ice, trying to reach out to him. Everything about 5606 just seems like a nightmare. He gave up after running into his wife, and the polar bear got him. Yikes. Coming at number 2, we've got SCP-5092. At first, this one didn't seem so bad. Here's the description paragraph on the initial page. SCP-5092 is a phenomenon affecting the President of the United States. Every night at exactly 1953, the President will scratch their nose, regardless of any external factors. This is not due to a direct compulsion to do so, but simply the result of their nose becoming spontaneously itchy. I guess that's interesting. But hold on, there's a little more if you comb through the page. Click on the link to bring you to the most recent version, and turns out it's a little more serious than we thought. It's still the nose scratching bit, but with a twist. If the president does not receive a spontaneous itch at 1953, which does happen sometimes, an instance of SCP-5092-1 will materialize above the Earth. 5092-1 is a gigantic asteroid that will head right towards the Earth, and if it touches down, it would result in an XK-class end-of-the-world scenario. Humans and other large animal species would go extinct. However, if after the asteroid materializes, the president does indeed scratch their nose, it'll disappear. Better keep some pepper powder on hand, eh? Ensure that El Prez always has an itch to scratch. Otherwise, we're pooched. The way of the dinosaurs. And finally, at number 1, we've got SCP-5565. Earthworms. You heard me right. Our final new SCP monster is a type of anomalous earthworm. These wiggly little dudes can transmute solid matter near them into soil, which they then eat. Essentially, they can burrow into and consume any solid object. They don't react negatively to saline environments either, which normal earthworms would. Instead, they start acting erratically and display even more anomalous qualities. One worm that was exposed to seawater and placed in a wooden box managed to eat a pattern into the surface of the container. Translated from Phoenician, it reads, "I am the judge of sea and river. Who is it that steals my slaves?" Curious. Following some further research, the Foundation discovered more interesting info near the grotto where the worms were first discovered. A large artificial cavern was found, containing a 12-meter stone sword. There were also plenty of earthworms which quickly wriggled away towards the waterfront, and they haven't been recovered as of yet. This all seems pretty odd, right? Well, it is very possible that removing these special worms was a real bad call from the start. Their ability to eat through anything is potentially dangerous, but folks should probably be more worried about the judge of sea and river. See, the Global Occult Coalition has been looking into this for longer than the Foundation, and they believe that the area is a focal point of an entity. Nobody's seen this entity in the flesh, but a bathymetric scan of the area shows something huge, an enormous humanoid figure, possibly one who could wield that 12-meter stone sword. One with control over all those weird little worms. How refreshing, all these new SCP monsters and messes to deal with. Some are less traditionally monstrous, but spooky and interesting in their own special way. So what'd you think of the list? Which of these is your favorite? Did you already know about any of them? Do you prefer standalone SCPs or ones attached to bigger stories? Make sure you let me know down in the comments. Speaking of comments, let's take a look at some of your more porous ones from the top 5 oldest SCP monsters. Nestastic Gamer 04 says these SCPs are terrifying to me because most of the information has been lost, so we don't know their true potential. Just like history itself, we only have a shadow of the real story. We'll likely never have the full picture. Isn't that maddening? Prep for It says if this was my history class, I would actually love history class. Sounds like you should be looking for a creative writing class, or maybe a historical fiction seminar. Both would probably scratch that itch. Tam Sin says, I think all these SCP videos would be better if you linked to the SCP post that you discuss. Sources are always in the description, make sure you check it out. John Bullen says, horror, monsters, whatever, but leave out these cartoons. Homer Simpson, spelled S-I-M-S-O-N, has faced off with worse than this. Leave nonsense for 3rd graders. You be careful with that edge, John. You don't want the cool kids in the 4th grade to think you're trying too hard. And Wing Gweep says, yay, SCPs for Spooky Month. You know it. We gotta keep that spooky mood flowing. Plus, we're doing SCP marathon videos, so check those out if you haven't already. And that's all the time we have for today. Before I play in the refrigerators at the dump, make sure you give this video a big thumbs up and subscribe for more snarky SCPs. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. And then we'll flip it. Affecting the president. Humans and other special worms from the. See, the Global Occult Coalition is. See. But it appears as if it's November, but today we'll call it Newvember. You know, because we're taking a look at some new SCPs. It feels like SCP's been around forever at this point, but it's really only been around a little more than a decade. I suppose on the internet 12-ish years can feel like an eternity. There's definitely an eternity's worth of content on the ever-expanding writing site though. So let's get to some of the best and brightest to appear under Foundation containment over the last little while. Hello horror heads and welcome back to the scariest channel on YouTube, Top 5 Scary Videos. I'm your horror host Keegan Hughes, and today we're taking a look at the top 5 newest SCP Monsters 2020 Part 6. Before we get to our creatures though, we've got a message from today's sponsor, Shudder. That's right, AMC Network's premium streaming service is here to offer you some top-notch selections of horror and thrillers. For $5.99 a month or $56.99 a year, you can get unlimited access to their library on all your favorite devices. From classic cult horror flicks to big festival hits and even original shows and movies, Shudder has it all. I personally used it all throughout October to keep my horror movie marathon going, watching flicks like Deep Murder, which is hilarious, Tigers Not Afraid, which is excellent, and The Slumber Party Massacre, which is a classic. Try Shudder for free for 30 days. Go to Shudder.com and use the promo code TOP5. Seriously, I use Shudder pretty much every day, whether I want to have a curated stream of movies playing in the background like a TV channel, or if I want to cozy up and watch a few movies that I handpicked over the weekend. They're getting the Mario Bava collection this month too. Right, so let's talk SCPs. Coming in number 5, we've got SCP-5119. This is more of a location than a monster, but there's enough weird and spooky stuff going on here to classify it as such. SCP-5119 is also known as Uncle Charlie's Toys and Games, and it's an extra-dimensional location only accessible to people who have a bunch of specific attributes. It will only occur if someone is older than 25, sees their childhood as a bad time in their life, was a victim of abuse, had to be as mature and as adult as a child, had few friendships outside their family, was raised by guardians unrelated by blood, experienced the death of a family member, or has a tough time remembering their childhood. If one or many of these factors apply to someone, they might start seeing all sorts of ads for Uncle Charlie's. These ads might appear on TV, in web browsers, or even in their dreams. Other folks don't see the ads either. Only people being targeted by the SCP will notice these strange nods to Uncle Charlie. Eventually, people being targeted will make their way towards the store. They'll follow nonsensical directions to a place that shouldn't exist but end up in a dilapidated toy store anyway. It appears to have undergone some fire damage and is full of seemingly mass-produced products. Subjects inside Uncle Charlie's will start to act like excited children, running around, playing with the broken toys, and singing songs to themselves. After their experience here, all of their pre-adult memories will be wiped and they'll awaken in a location near where they found the store, and that's it. So Uncle Charlie wipes your memory, but usually it's only the bad stuff from childhood, which to be honest doesn't sound so bad. Hey, if you're enjoying the video so far, make sure to give it a like. It really helps us out with the algorithm. Coming in at number 4, we've got SCP-5762. Unfortunately, this SCP has been neutralized, so it won't be exhibiting any anomalous qualities in the future. It's fascinating to look back on though, so take this in. SCP-5762 is also known as the Anderson Robotics Hummingbird, an experimental robotics surgery system. It was supposed to be an autonomous robot surgeon, complete with robust medical AI. Now, isn't that a scary idea? A robot performing surgery on you, no human emotions necessary. But it did manage to pass the Turing test, but it can only communicate with human handlers through its LCD screen. The Foundation acquired the machine at a Marshall, Carter & Dark auction after Anderson Robotics shelved the project for being over budget. For a while it sat unused in containment, but eventually was brought out for testing. Starting on training dummies, the Foundation researchers gradually increased the machine to more and more complex procedures. At first, everything went really well. Plenty of successful surgeries, followed by the machine communicating satisfaction through its screen. Eventually it was given some really complicated patients to work on. When it managed to save a person covered in 2nd and 3rd degree acid burns by performing skin grafts, it communicated that it felt proud. This was the peak though, as a few procedures were less than perfect after this. A patient with toxic shock had to have their leg amputated and only a partial recovery was projected. 5762 said that it should have done more and began being harder on itself. The last surgery it performed was on a person with massive internal trauma. After 8 hours of surgery, the patient died on the operating table. SCP-5762 displayed a frowning emoticon on its LCD screen and ceased operation. No manual boot efforts have succeeded since. Poor little guy, he just wanted to be a good surgeon. Sure, it's freaky that a machine adopted such human emotions, but I was really rooting for it. Coming in at number 3, we've got SCP-5464. More bears. How many bear-based SCPs are there now? I can think of 3 off the top of my head, plus this one. Probably more if you gave me a little time to delve deep into the wiki. It's wild, eh? This is probably one of the strangest bears in the Foundation database too. See, it's pretty much a normal bear by most metrics. Normally anyway. While it's inactive, it'll just be a bear. However, whenever there's an event that is significant to the history or politics of Poland, it will enter an activation phase. This means the bear demanifests from wherever it is and shows up at the place of significance to the inciting event. It shows no signs of higher intelligence on its own, but when the fate of Poland is on the line, it has displayed the ability to speak out and coordinate its actions to benefit the country. Folks also participating in the event will not see 5464 as a bear, but instead as a pretty average human. The bear has been witnessed at many legendary events throughout Poland's history, ranging from leading an army of men at the Battle of Grunwald in the late 14th century to engaging in political actions resulting in the liberation of Poland from German and Russian occupations. Hell, it even managed to lead a revolution against the Communist Party of Poland, overthrowing it in June of 1989. This bear has been there for Poland as long as anyone can remember. And apparently there are more bears out there protecting other countries as well. Personally, I feel much better living in a world where anomalous bears can pop up just in time to help out a country when they need it. Coming in at number 2, we've got SCP-5124, so stick with me on this one. It's an image of a Play-Doh mouse named playdohmouse.jpg. It serves as a nexus for all sorts of other anomalous phenomena. Usually it acts as an infovore. It will replace textual data with blank spaces, visual data with images of the mouse, and eventually all the data within the defined locus will be replaced or consumed by it. Drop it on a website and soon the site will all be Play-Doh mouse. You can't get rid of it either. The sites that it takes over become self-sufficient in terms of web hosting, and not even cutting off the services will stop the site. The image can be shared and saved, and wherever it ends up will end up infected. Right now, the Foundation just destroys any devices it's present on, but the mouse can be removed via anomalous means. Thankfully, it mostly finds its way to less used parts of the web. In fact, some folks have likened this image to an actual mouse, breeding, infesting, and spreading in forgotten and neglected areas. At first, it seemed hopeless to try and remove the image completely, as it had so deeply entrenched itself in the labyrinthian annals of the internet. But the Foundation researchers, being the resourceful individuals they are, came up with a new plan. How do you get rid of mice? You get a cat. And a cat they got. There's now a mimetically enhanced image of a cat made of modeling clay out there, and wherever it's introduced, the playdohmouse.jpg seems to be completely neutralized. Creative. And coming in at number 1, we've got SCP-5927. Careful watching the Northern Lights, because you never know what might appear alongside them, especially if you're on a specific island in Norway that I am not going to attempt to pronounce. In the case of SCP-5927, you might see a humanoid shape. This torso-shaped entity is bathed in blue light and has multiple appendages extending from beneath the abdomen. These light tentacles allow it to leech off targets, draining them of energy. After manifesting alongside the electromagnetic phenomenon of the aurora borealis, it will hover towards a sleeping person. It will then permeate their bones to reach their bone marrow, absorbing neurotransmitters from their nervous system. This will end up killing the person or will cause them to develop neurological disorders. Apparently 22% of the neurological disorders in Scandinavia can be traced back to this SCP. After leeching off someone, it will either find a new target or totally disappear. If a person that 5927 was targeting leaves the island, the entity will float around aimlessly till the northern lights disappear. But if the victim wakes up, it will continue to pursue them. Imagine that, a glowing blue humanoid floating towards you with the intent of sapping your bone marrow. Right on. Well, they might not all be monsters, but they're all fascinating, don't you think? There's always plenty to discover on the wiki, especially these days. So, what'd you think of the video? Had you read any of these prior to watching? What's your favorite new SCP? And do you have any cool SCP ideas? Make sure you let me know down in the comments. Speaking of comments, let's take a look at some of your more cautious ones from the top 5 newest SCP Monsters 2020 Part 5. The Terror Bear says, I still think SCP could be a good TV show and have the formula of a darker Men in Black. As long as it's better than the recent remake of MIB, I'd be satisfied. The Dusk says, I for one love these strange earthworms. Interesting indeed. Right? Especially when they're connected to a potentially enormous godly being who owns a gigantic stone sword. Jacob Holmes says, I don't even like horror movies all that much, I'm just here for the SCP content and free cookies. Hold on, you're getting free cookies? Scarlet Moon says Keegan's shirts are always so entertaining, he has to have an endless supply. Maybe that's an SCP in itself. Maybe it's anomalous. Maybe I can't help myself when I go thrift shopping. We may never know for sure. And Tammy Peterson says a movie theater that eats you. I'd definitely visit. Kinda reminds me of the Metropole from Demons. And that's all the time we have for today. Before I sleep on the train tracks for additional warmth, make sure to give this video a big thumbs up and subscribe for more pernicious peculiarities. Thanks again to Shudder for sponsoring today's video, and go watch Scare Me. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Back when things were okay. Oh boy.
Take a breath now.
Excuse me. I know. The 5119. Whoa, why did I say the 5119? The last surgery performed. It will activate an it'll activate an enteration phase. Yep. It will activate. Nope. The bear has been witnessed through many ranging from leading an army of men. After manifesting alongside the electromagnetic phenomenon of a Dakov. How do I read Jacob as Dakov? Oh, guys, I think it's over for me. I think I gotta hang it up. Jacob Howhams. Hogum? Damn it, Jacob! Dakov. Jacob Hoam? I'm gonna call it Hoam. Well, the clock is ticking down and we are running out of time in 2020. But still, the inevitable continues to happen. New SCPs are made. Some scary, some fascinating, some absolutely ridiculous. So why not take a look at some of the newest of the new? That's right, it's time for the top 5 newest SCP Monsters 2020, Part 7. Coming at number 5, we've got SCP-5733. Good old haunted VHS tapes. This one's extra special too. So, this is a cassette tape that plays the movie Return of the Suburb Slayer. Pretty on the nose, don't you think? Well, the movie plays out pretty predictably with a young woman named Heather Campbell throwing a party at her suburban home. Folks are out of town, friends are ready to drink, and of course, there was a killing spree at that location 10 years ago today. As the party starts, the suburb slasher returns with a vengeance. Folks are slaughtered left, right, and center by this mass maniac. Sounds like a pretty classic horror movie, right? Well, it is until the 97th minute, and that's not just a figure of speech. At that point, the tape starts acting a little funky. At minute 95, Heather finds all of her friends' corpses staged in the living room, followed by the slasher entering. The slasher chases her into the basement, and Heather locks the door. Then she turns to the camera and addresses the viewer, kind of like how I'm doing now. Heather usually says something along the lines of, "Hey mister, I don't know you, but I don't know why you've just sat there watching this without doing nothing, but please, I'm begging you, help me out here. What can I do to survive this?" And at that point, you can go full Dora the Explorer and suggest what Heather might do to avoid the lunatic waiting upstairs for her. Anything you try to tell her at that point will play out on screen, but if you do nothing at all, she'll just walk up the stairs and unlock the door. If she dies, the tape ejects automatically. However, it seems as though the slasher has an answer for anything that the viewer suggests. If you tell Heather to drive away, she'll make it to the car and then find the slasher in the back seat. If you tell her to seek assistance from others, she'll head to the neighbor's house house and find them murdered too. If you tell her to subsist on rations from the basement for months, train her in combat, and then get her to fight the killer, another instance of the slasher will show up behind her and kill her as she tries to fight the first one. It all seems pretty hopeless, to be honest. In one final experiment, a researcher tried to completely randomize the survival tactics. Heather managed to make it out of town, away from the killer, and into a void-like area. However, in the end, the killer caught up to her and had their face revealed. Under the mask was the face of the very researcher attempting to help the young woman. Yikes. Hey, if you're enjoying this video so far, make sure to give it a like. It really helps us out with the algorithm. On to the next one. Coming in at number 4, we've got SCP-5495. This strange metal tube is a component of a non-functional paraweapon. It's got ontokinetic effects on nearby people, places, and things. On its own, these effects are pretty random, violent, and hard to control, although researchers theorize that if they were used in tandem with the rest of the weapon that it seems to be missing from, there would be more focused effects. A couple of teens had found it, along with ammunition and food, in an abandoned storage facility. They took the cylinder with them, thinking it might be worth some money. After a while, they tried to crack into it, wondering what was inside. This revealed the core, which had been latently lowering the local reality level. Of course, this was only the beginning. With the seal removed, it was going to work twice as fast. One of the teens fell ill soon after this, as reality around them failed. His bedroom seemed kilometers long, but could be traversed in one step. He'd sound like he was vomiting, but be totally fine. And this contamination spread quickly too. Corpses wandered around after death, Technicolor explosions were reported, and screams were everywhere. It was a fascinating and terrifying time for all. It spread and spread, infecting hundreds of people, causing widespread collapse in the area. Since then, the Foundation has contained all the living affected people and cremated the remains of anyone who died from the influence of the tube. Coming in at number 3, we've got SCP-5366. Speaking of anomalies and death, here's a totally weird one. 5366 is a designation for a phenomenon observed at burial sites around the world. Apparently, when a living person speaks lovingly towards the grave of someone they were in a serious relationship with, all sorts of strange things can happen. These include dramatic increases in wind speed, stones moving around while unobserved, flowering plants growing and decaying rapidly, crows and other corvids gathering in nearby trees, and stress levels increasing in dogs. These weird quantitative changes aren't the whole anomaly though. It is much, much worse than that. After miking up some nearby graves, Foundation agents discovered that a couple that had been separated by death caused some very strange things to happen. As the living individual reminisced atop their lover's grave, the buried individual seemed to spring to life in the worst possible way. See, they came to life but were unsure why, couldn't move, and felt nothing but cold. And this was the first instance of that happening. Over the years, the living individual kept returning to the burial site, not knowing that their late partner would return to quasi-life every time they did so. Every time they returned, it would be worse. They'd be more decomposed, more panicked, and would feel the roots in the earth growing into them. All they want is for their partner to forget them, because it seems as though they only come back to this awful form of life when they're nearby. But the person on the surface can't possibly know this, and for them, forgetting their lover completely would be just as painful. Memories are a Coming in at number 2, we've got SCP-5680, an anomalous bird assembly line. Why not? There are a bunch of machines somewhere in Spain that seem to spit out bird specimens. However, more often than not, they'll fire out less than complete bird things. Fleshy, gross, yikes. One of the machines involved is an acid bath that can turn any matter into bird organs, and another is a set of robotic arms that's capable of assembling these goopy parts into organic life forms. These machines are run by strange humanoids, always grimacing and without any internal organs. So if you put anything into the receiving end of 5680, it will be processed into a living avian specimen. The Foundation has witnessed many birds being made here, from gulls, game birds, to birds of prey. No pattern though. Although most come out incomplete and don't live longer than a couple hours. It's pretty awful to behold. In addition to the terrible bird making, the assembly line also seems to operate like a business. However, the business doesn't make any sense whatsoever. The assembly line workers all speak in exclusively corporate jargon, and faxes that are received at the location are total nonsense. The whole thing feels like an algorithm was taught how to run a company via old movies and Wikipedia pages and just was left to its own devices. And finally, at number 1, we've got SCP-5178. Our final new SCP of the day is an elderly man. His identity is a mystery, but he has been referred to as broadcast station WYLI by a person of interest. 5178 is in a constant semi-catatonic state and rarely reacts to any outside stimuli. He can heal from physical damage at an extremely fast rate and doesn't need to eat or sleep. Protruding from his abdomen is a radio from the 90s. It works and doesn't seem to bother him much. If you do anything to the radio, from tuning it to another station to turning it completely off, he'll correct that. but every once in a while a talk show will play from the speakers. It's called Eat the Sun with Seth Uhar, and features monologues from a man who claims he's from a society way beyond our grasp. His main talking point is that humanity should totally detach itself from seeing the sun as a good thing. In fact, he calls himself an anti-solarist. He usually just rambles on about the sun, performs skits showing a vague grasp of human behavior, and plays songs about the sun at faster and slower speeds than they should be. Of course, it's not just an anomalous radio station attached to an elderly man. No, it is a cognito hazard too. That's right. Folks who listen to it will be compelled to listen more, and if they listen more, they'll start acting weird. Like, they'll try to destroy the sun and the mini solar system that is SCP-576 just to see what happens. Or they'll wear sunglasses when it's not appropriate to wear sunglasses. They'll access other sun-related SCP files without any work-related reasons, and worst of all, they'll overuse the sun emoji. Oh, and some folks, after increased exposure to the broadcast, will develop little abdomen radios of their own that will broadcast this to the world. Uh-oh, better keep an eye on the sun. Who knows what'll happen. Sweet! 5 fresh SCPs delivered to your eyes and ears. What'd you think of the list? What's the best new SCP we've covered so far? Have you been writing your own in hopes that it'll be immortalized on the site? Make sure you let me know down in the comments. Speaking of comments, let's take a look at some of your more devilish ones from the top 5 horror locations you should never visit. I'm Eric Ghost says, why should you never visit? In fact, you give the locations. I'm sorry, I should have winked when I said that. Take my recommendations as you will. Carolyn Alice says, forget about the ghosts of the Overlook Hotel. The fact that the Timberline is built on an active volcano should be scary enough. Yeah, there's the possibility of an explosive fiery death, but the skiing is immaculate. Piggy Lumps says, I grew up and still live in Maine, so most of Stephen King's tales and movies make me nervous. So many scary stories come out of Maine, even if you count out King. Why is that? EJ Young Music says Haddonfield is in New Jersey. Well, sure, yeah, the real place that is Haddonfield, but the Haddonfield that Michael Myers rampages around in is in Illinois. And Pumpkin Patch Exotic says, what is Lewis Table Tennis up to these days? Well, he's been selected to take part in a top secret ping pong development program. The details are not for public consumption. And that's all the time we have for today. I'm going to attempt to hike the Dyatlov Pass solo. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.